Moving on, whatever. Want to know if key differences between an empath and a highly sensitive person. Oh my god. Like most things in life, sensitivity exists on a spectrum. That's true. It says think of narcissists, sociopaths, and others with antisocial personality disorder as the scale's black and darkness shades of gray. They are the farthest darkest endpoints of sensitivity spectrum, Hannibal Lecter's world. This is the colorful part of the spectrum. Journey through the I'm gonna come back to this after this next part of the video because this is complete bullshit. These people think that sociopaths, psychopaths, all that stuff is on the dark spectrum and empaths are on like the colorful rainbow. They of course gotta attach the fucking rainbow to the spectrum. There are these two spectrums that are polar opposite. I'm gonna read this shit out to you after and you're gonna see why I'm so fed up with this bullshit. So let's get into the next segment. Hey everyone, this video is going to be about empaths, and if any of you know anything about empath discourse online, you know that it can be criticized, because as soon as you do, you are met with a bunch of toxic, positively passive-aggressive assholes who want to talk down to you about how empathetic and above you they are, while wishing you love and light always. And I just got sick of it, so I recorded it about a year ago, which was at the time when my viewer base was mostly a bunch of trolls, nitpicking and picking apart everything I had to say. So keep in mind that that's where my head was at the time. Those are the type of people who I was responding to at the time, and not to take what I say personally from when I was recording it. I would re-record it again, but this was like hours and hours of research and inserts that I don't want to redo because you guys know I hate reading. So we're gonna work with what we got. For those of you who said you like my rants, you'll be happy with this one. So anyway, let's get into the video. All across the internet, we have seen people claiming to be empaths. Seen it on TikTok, on Tumblr, on Twitter, and notoriously on YouTube. We have seen Shane Dawson claiming to be one, while many people have been able to see through that, but that's another story for another day. I'm not here to psychoanalyze Shane Dawson. I am here to explain to you what an empath really is versus the misconceptions that people have about them. It's common for people to have a misunderstanding of their own abilities and their own intellect. We know this because when you have someone take a personality quiz, oftentimes they'll get an answer that doesn't actually apply to them, or the personality type that they get is something that's rare and everyone's getting that one, because it shows that that's what everyone wants to be, or that's what they see themselves as. It's not really an indicator of who they really are, because funnily enough, when you're the one describing your own personality, that is the most inaccurate depiction in most cases. And then the test will reflect back what you want to be, since those are the answers you gave, and then that reaffirms your own confirmation bias. So you go around saying, yeah, I'm this and I'm that. Out of all of these issues, we also have this new trend where everybody wants to be spiritual. That's something that you can make an entire video out of as to what drives people to be spiritual. But because they see themselves as spiritual, they then see empaths as something that's spiritual due to the stereotype. And that stereotype being a person who is deeply emotional, can emotionally connect to other people's emotions, and have this deep understanding of someone else's aura and their personality and how they feel, and even have the ability to heal other people. So when we talk about spirituality and enlightenment, that seems like the dream. It only makes sense why these people would gravitate towards that sort of an idea, and why people desperately want to then embody that personality. But as we dive into the reality of what empaths are, you'll then see that rather than creating an opportunity for enlightenment, this is actually resulting in a very dangerous outcome. Let's start with the history of empaths. It's a very short history, but for those of you who don't know, the definition of an empath is, chiefly in science fiction, a person with paranormal ability to apprehend the mental or emotional state of another individual. Now, they mention science fiction because that's where it came from. One very famous example would be Raven from Teen Titans. In her comic book, she is an empath. She has supernatural powers. She's able to understand other people's emotions and tap into them and manipulate them. And there are plenty of other characters who can do this, but it was originally a magical thing, something that humans would never be able to do. But a lot of those symptoms are things that relate to things that we've seen humans do. There are plenty of us who have seen cases where with a single touch, a human being is able to make someone else feel better. Just the way that they hug someone or the way that they look at someone instantly can improve their mental state. We've seen humans who know exactly what to say to make the situation better, or know exactly what's wrong with someone without even being given much information on their circumstance. We've seen people who are able to meet someone and can see your deepest fears, your deepest secrets, your insecurities, your hopes, your dreams, your desires without you ever saying a thing. And it seems supernatural. We don't have proof that supernatural abilities exist, and we have no way of disproving it either. So it's very easy for people to then believe that the empaths in these comic books are real, and that there actually are people who are capable of doing these magical things. How else could they be able to do that if not some sort of spiritual connection or some sort of supernatural, paranormal sixth sense? And that's how we got to where we are today. But what people don't realize is that there is another way. The first issue that this creates is that no one can confirm or deny if someone is an empath, because the entire concept is based on understanding how someone works. It's similar to the theory of being in denial. It's hard to prove that the theory of denial exists, because if you don't believe in it, you could just be in denial. So with empaths, if you don't believe that someone's an empath, someone could just say it's because you're not an empath. If you believe that someone is an empath, you can just say because you're an empath, you know. And with most things in life, we can't really prove anything, but we can disprove things. We just have to find a way. And I think that I achieved that here. So I'm not here to convince anybody that I'm an empath. I don't really care what anyone else's opinion is of who I am. There's no way for me to prove it to someone anyway, so it's a fool's errand to even try. The general idea that people have isn't true, and that there are actual glaring contradictions in that logic. And once I show those contradictions, that can then maybe give us some hope of having a more logical approach to this entire concept. So now that you know about the origin of empaths, let's move on to the next subject. That being the details of the definition surrounding empathy. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Now, I think that the thing that confuses people the most about this definition is the word share. It says to understand first, but then it says and share. That's specifically what makes people confuse this with another word that I'll get into in a minute. The key word in this definition when we're talking about empaths and ability is the understanding. Because we've already proven that humans can share a feeling with someone without understanding it. Because there's plenty of people with disorders out there where they literally do not understand the other emotion, but can share it with someone through mimicry and other things, like with psychopaths and manipulators. So that's how we know that sharing isn't what's as important when it comes to being an empath as it is understanding. So another word that's very similar to empathy that we all know is sympathy. And that's what people get confused all the time. Now, there weren't a bunch of definitions for empathy. There's only one definition for sympathy. Sympathy is defined as feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune, understanding between people, common feeling. See, now this definition is so loose that almost sounds like an empath. Understanding between people, common feeling. What does that even mean in comparison? It's almost the exact same thing, but I'll get back to that in a minute. I'm going to read the other ones. It says support in the form of shared feelings or opinions, agreement with or approval of an opinion or aim, favorable attitude, relating harmoniously to someone else in keeping, the state or fact of responding in a way similar or corresponding to an action elsewhere. So all these definitions are so similar but different that you could easily confuse sympathy with empathy. But half of them are conveying the same message, which is sympathy is feeling, empathy is understanding. I know that you're seeing one here that says understanding between people, common feeling, but again, it's coupled with common feeling. And then all these other ones, again, you can read them again. A favorable attitude, harmoniously relating, pity, sorrow, all these feelings. That's what sympathy is. And I'm going to prove that further. You can literally just look up what's the difference between the two. Here's an image. I want to click it real quick. I'm sorry, that must hurt. And then here it shows them crying together. It's like they literally have it backwards. Because again, empathy is more so understanding. Sympathy is about feeling for someone. When you feel pity or sorrow, that's you feeling for another person. So wouldn't it make more sense if you were the second one? Another one, it says pity, I'm sorry for you. Sympathy, I feel for you. Empathy, I feel for you. And so then it says compassion, I am moved by you, which is bigger than sympathy and empathy. That's a whole separate subject. But keep in mind that in this graph, this makes a lot more sense. That it says, I feel for you with sympathy. And then it shows a bigger circle for I feel with you with empathy. So we're talking about understanding emotions, understanding people, talking about how our emotions affect each other. This can be interpreted in different ways. In some senses, empathy would be the bigger circle and others sympathy should. Because you can sympathize with someone more than you can empathize with someone. You can feel for someone's situation without actually understanding what's going on in their head. People do it when they watch TV shows all the time, when they talk to people. There's professions where people are supposed to do that. You don't have to know what's exactly going on in their brain to feel for them. But then in other circles where you are really understanding where this person's coming from and you're trying to help them, then you could say that empathy is the bigger circle for I feel with you. And this is because thoughts and emotions are two different things. People can sympathize with base emotions that are displayed on someone's face because it's easy to recognize and identify with. Understanding the thoughts behind those emotions and the complexities within is a much harder thing, which requires empathy. So that's why I say you can sympathize easier than you can empathize with people. So this is from nngroup.com, meaning Nielsen Norman Group. It shows this graph between effort, understanding, and engagement. So it shows pity here saying, I'm sorry for you. Sympathy saying, I feel for you. Empathy saying, I feel with you. Compassion saying, I am moved by you. This is why I didn't like the definitions of sympathy, because it showed pity as one of the definitions, and defining stuff is hard. You have to use synonyms. I get it. But pity is not the same as sympathy. They're two separate things. That's why they're two separate circles here. Empathy and sympathy clearly aren't the same, and compassion is not the same as empathy or sympathy. And people get all that stuff confused. They think that if they have sorrow for another person, they're an empath. They think that if they have all this compassion for someone, they're an empath, when they're not the same thing. Now they can overlap. That's why you see these overlapping circles. You know what that means. But it doesn't like greatly overlap. It just means that sometimes they can be part of the same thing. You can have compassion for someone and experience pity for them. You can have empathy for someone and still pity them. Because emotions are so complex, you can feel multiple emotions at once, or you could be having emotions towards multiple aspects of a person. You could pity them in one aspect while empathizing with them in another. So that's why this isn't completely accurate, but it still gives you an idea of what puts in more effort versus the understanding and the engagement. So with empathy, it takes more understanding to have empathy than it does to have sympathy, and that is very accurate even based off the definitions. Engagement. As we know, with empaths, the big stereotype is that they are very engaging, that they're like the bandages for the planet, which I'll get into later. You know, you have compassion, it makes you want to engage. Like again, when you watch a show, you give it your undivided attention when you feel this compassion for a character, you know, or a person in real life. So those are just ways for you to relate to what I'm saying here. Now, I don't like the fact that on the side here it says the size of the circles indicates the ability to positively impact users, because there's a thin line between love and hate. You can't dictate whether or not it's positive affecting or not, because what's positive to one person is negative to another. So I would say that this is kind of biased, but most humans are optimistic and positive, so you're kind of screwed anytime you look up any psychological information. What they come to understand is usually through the lens of rose-tinted glasses. Because perception versus reality is a big thing here. You can perceive someone as displaying a certain emotion and sympathize with that, even if that isn't how they feel in reality. Therefore, you are showing compassion for an emotion that isn't based in reality. That would be a way of having compassion for something without the empathy to truly understand someone's feelings. So now, we're going to look up a text explanation of the difference between the two. I'm going to look at this as well because this interested me, this picture. When describing what you feel about the other person's emotions, you might be one of two words, empathy and sympathy. These words sound very similar. They both come from Greek and therefore are confused very often. Even this thing says it. And then it says, the definition is acknowledging that the other person is going through an emotional or physical struggle, supporting them and giving them comfort. Empathy is something more than just this. It's actually understanding what the other person is feeling because you've had a similar experience yourself, or you're able to put yourself in their shoes. I think it means to say that I slightly disagree with. I need to make a video on how people shouldn't be putting themselves in other people's shoes. They need to look at situations with a different perspective because that isn't as empathetic as you think it is. But whenever I make that video, I'll just put in the iCard at the top here. I'm going to move on now because I have yet to explain that. So I don't completely agree with that definition, but what I will say is the difference is they're stressing the fact that you have to understand it to have empathy. With sympathy, you can just acknowledge it or, get the fundamental of it without actually having to understand what's going on in their head to care. So we're at 7esl.com. And so it says here, they can't replace one another in a sentence, but what's the difference? And that's a big thing. It's not that people say sympathy when they really mean empathy, it's that they feel sympathy a lot of times. Empathy versus sympathy. Sympathy is acknowledging that the other person is going through an emotional or physical struggle, supporting them and giving them comfort. And so the key word here, or the key phrase, is giving them comfort. Empathy is something more than just this. It's actually understanding what the other person is feeling because you've had a similar experience yourself, or you're able to put yourself in their shoes. Because they don't understand where that person's coming from, but they have all this compassion and all these other things, or they have this pity, etc., but they think it's empathy because it's very, very similar. So the funny thing is with most stuff in the world, people will confuse something and just interchange the words. But this is something where, funnily enough, because it's about feelings and your heartstrings and stuff, they confuse it emotionally instead of verbally. So I would say you should read this if you really want to get an understanding, because they go into like examples here of sympathy versus empathy, how to use sympathy versus empathy correctly. This is the longer picture that has more of the examples. And I'm going to link this website in the description, but this is it. If you don't know, it's 7esl.com. But the most important thing here is where it says giving them comfort when it comes to sympathy. Because what's comfort? A state of physical ease and freedom, pain and constraint. The easing or alleviation of a person's feelings of grief or distress. Now, what does that sound like to you? What people say empaths are. People constantly say, oh, they relieve people's pain, they heal them, they heal the planet, they're the bandage for the planet. And yet, that's a part of the definition of sympathy and not empathy. It is actually specifically specified as the difference between sympathy and empathy. And yet, that's one of the big factors that makes people think they're an empath. Do you see why I'm making this video? Now I could show you this stuff all day, but here it says how to be sympathetic. It says that's too bad. Here it says how to be empathetic. And then they try to stitch the thing up for the person. But that has nothing to do with, and this is from Grammarly, that has nothing to do with the definitions. You don't have to help somebody stitch up their fucking bear to be empathetic towards them. It quite literally said the sympathy was giving someone comfort, and the definition of comfort itself explains it even further. The easing or alleviation of a person's feelings of grief or distress. Does it sound like you're alleviating someone's stress or freeing them from their pain or alleviating their circumstance if you stitch up their broken teddy bear? Yes, but that would be considered sympathy. So just keep all those things in mind. This is the stuff that constantly bothers me about people's definitions of these things, because they really just don't get it. And when you look at these verses, the reason some people are going to say, well, how do you know that this image is more accurate than the other one? How do you know that this versus the two is more accurate than the other image saying the verses between the two? Because this is an example, the others are definitions. Go look at the definitions first. Look at the key words of the definitions. Look at the synonyms of the definitions. I'll show them to you right here to give you an example. Comfort, consolation, solace, condolence, sympathy. Sympathy is right there in the synonyms of comfort. Fellow feeling. I don't see empathy anywhere here. Empathy is not a synonym. It's not a main one. It's not in the top, whatever, 20 these are, 15 synonyms. Cheer, help, support, relief, easement, alleviation. Now let's go to sympathy and look at those synonyms. Pity, condolence, consolation, comfort. There's that word. It's in the top 5. Solace, support, encouragement, compassion, caring, concern, solicitude. And then finally, you see empathy here. Warmth, but remember all the other words, okay? Of course, empathy is going to be a synonym of sympathy. Everyone believes them interchangeably. What do you expect? But pay attention to all those other words. It says consideration, kindness, tenderness. Here's the synonyms of empathy. Now, these are more complicated. Why? Because empathy is a more complicated subject. It says affinity with, rapport with, sympathy with, understanding of, sensitivity towards, sensibility to, identification with, awareness of, fellowship with, fellow feeling for, like-mindedness, togetherness, closeness to, chemistry. All these words are so much more complex than the synonyms for sympathy. And what you don't see here is comfort. It's not at least a main synonym of empathy. So whenever you see these pictures that are showing someone comforting another person or alleviating their circumstance, that is sympathy. And that's what people do not understand. Oh, I like to help people so much. That's what makes me an empath. That makes you a sympath, maybe, which there isn't a word for. And I honestly think that there should be one. That is my conclusion to this whole part of this video. We need to have a word for these people, and we need to call them sympaths, because that's what they are, or at least what they're claiming to be. It's easy for anyone to pretend to care about you. If you're low on money, it's easy for anyone to lend you $1. It's easy for someone to stitch up your bear if they know how. It's easy for somebody to listen to your problems while the whole time they're thinking, screw you. Like, these are things that humans can already do. That does not separate them from the rare few that are empaths. But understanding is something that not everyone can do with different things. You can show someone information all day and they don't understand it. And that's why this is such a more complicated subject. So I think I went through everything with the definitions. If I didn't, then I'll just come back in and edit somewhere. But I'm going to move on from that to the next thing. I think it's really important for people to understand that you can be empathetic and not be an empath, obviously. At no point am I saying only empaths can be empathetic, and you should not think that. What I am saying is that empaths are on a higher level of empathy than the regular person. So not only do people have this wild misconception of what empathy is, which is something that we can all experience, but if they can't even understand the basic level of empathy on a regular common human scale, how are they supposed to understand what an empath is? Most people have a false perception of who they are. Most people cannot look at themselves objectively and understand what their capabilities are when it comes to understanding emotions. Everybody thinks they're a good judge of character. Everybody thinks that they're, helpful, or at least people who like to be helpful. They all think that they're the most helpful, or they're this or that, and they all think that that counts. That's not how it works. It's going to be very complicated. I'm going to do my best to explain it, but just know you can be empathetic and not be an empath. You can be highly empathetic. There's people called HSP. I want to get into that now. Now, I'm reading from this website because of what it says at the bottom, which we'll get into in a minute. Because HSP is about something that goes years back. What is a highly sensitive person? And so this is from verywellmind.com. It says, a highly sensitive person, HSP, is a neurodivergent individual who is thought to have an increased or deeper central nervous system sensitivity to physical, emotion, or social stimuli. Some refer to this as having sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS for short. Now, notice that this was not in the synonyms for empathy. This was not in the synonyms for empath, because they're not the same thing. And if anything, most of these people could consider themselves this. Just like how most people consider themselves neurodivergent. Don't you think it's kind of funny that most people who say that they're neurodivergent across the internet also say they're an empath? No, you're HSP, if anything. says, while highly sensitive people are sometimes negatively described as being too sensitive, it is a personality trait that brings both strengths and challenges. The term highly sensitive person was first coined by psychologists Elaine Aron and Arthur Aron in the mid-1990s. It's a fairly new concept is what I'm trying to tell you guys. And this right here is even talking about it before I could mention it. She published her book, The Highly Sensitive Person, in 1996, and interest in the concept has continued to grow since then. Because it is definitely something of legitimacy, and it is even possible that a sympath is a highly sensitive person. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that they're different things, but I think that you can be both, but I really think we need to dive into the word sympath more. I'm just going to say here that in a very short amount of time, I am exhausted looking at how many people are getting wrong the difference between HSP and empath. All these websites, for the most part, that I'm showing right here are quoting the same fucking wannabe empath who is saying that empaths have all the traits of HSP people. They're like, they have everything that HSP people have and more. And again, this is psychology, they're theories. This is a theory that only goes back to 1990, 1996 or so. But we'll just go back to the definition and I'll do my best to explain the difference to you. I'm going to get into a segment where I explain all these misconceptions, so I will come back to that shit and debunk it, but we're not ready for that yet. So if you're a highly sensitive person, it pretty much explains itself in the definition. You have highly sensitive sensory processing sensitivity. So all those stereotypes that people give empaths can be explained away with HSP. If you get a physical feeling of something, you could just be HSP. I'm trying to tell you guys this in pieces. But I will go into depth about how you can have these feelings and it's more so an understanding that causes it rather than this like mystical, spiritual, emotional feeling that people keep referring to. So the best way that I can put in layman's terms is that HSP people are the sensitive stereotype of empaths. All the stuff that people say about empaths with feeling nature and getting a feeling through their body when someone else gets a bad feeling and all these other things, you could explain that as symptoms of HSP because it's all about being a highly sensitive person, having sensory processing sensitivity or a high level of it. That literally has nothing to do with understanding. You feeling stuff doesn't mean you understand how it works. And that's why they're different. Now, can you be both HSP and an empath? Based off the definition, yes, you can be both, but it doesn't mean that all empaths are both because people experience feelings differently. This perpetuates the idea that when someone has an emotional feeling, we all get the same feeling from it. You know, all empaths get the same surge in the same place in the same way. That's not how it works. It just, so let me just move on. The point is we'll come back to HSP when I start debunking shit. And through the debunking, maybe you'll get a better idea of how it works. Because every time I try to read a definition, they just confuse it with empathy. It's like when I was trying to explain sympathy versus empathy, but like 10 times worse. So just take my word for it for now. You'll see it soon. All right. So what does all that mean? What's the takeaway? What am I supposed to get from all this information you just told me? Well, this leads into the next part that I want to talk about, which is what empathism actually is. To explain further, before I get into these examples. So there's actually a word for a higher level of understanding because we're talking about the conscious versus the subconscious and all that stuff going on in your head. Think to yourself, what would be a higher level of understanding something? If you're put into a scenario where people are feeling a bunch of different emotions, if you have to sit there and talk to yourself in your head and try to process and discern information, that's a pretty slow form of understanding, right? A normal form that everyone experiences for the most part, unless you have like a mental disorder that's hindering you, that's a separate subject, would be if you're talking to somebody and they make a facial expression that's pretty obvious that they're mad, you realize that they're mad. That's a normal level of speed for understanding information. A faster speed would be if you walk into a room and you get an eerie feeling. If you just can tell that there's tension. You barely had a chance to even look at anyone's face, look at their demeanor. and you already have this feeling. This is what we call thin slicing. Now, I couldn't find a Webster definition of that because I don't think that there is one, but it says on Wikipedia, thin slicing is a term used in psychology and philosophy to describe the ability to find patterns in events based on only the thin slices of narrow windows of experience. If you just walk into a room and you get an eerie feeling, that does not make you an empath. Everybody has those moments for the most part. So if you are just like, oh, there's tension in this room, you're discerning some kind of information. The term refers to the process of making very quick inferences about the state, characteristics, or details of an individual or situation with minimal amounts of information. Research has found that brief judgments based on thin slicing are similar to those judgments based on more information. Judgments based on thin slicing can be as accurate or even more so than judgments based on much more information. So, empathism is basically people who have a skill set of understanding. And there's different ways to understand something in different levels. I'll put it this way. If you can't have a highly above average level of understanding feelings, then you cannot call yourself an empath just based off of the definition alone. So the whole point of a thin slice is, like I said with that example, you walk into a room and you get this eerie feeling that there's all this tension. It's because our eyes can see a lot more than we are consciously aware of. We can see things out the corner of our eye constantly. You can tell that someone's standing there even if you're not looking directly at them. But a lot of times our conscious mind shuts off that perception because whatever is in the corner of our eye is shit that we see every day. It's unnecessary. It's nothing important. But if something dangerous were to move into our vision, we'd be like, oh, what's that? The same thing goes with other senses. When you talk about people who are blind, their other senses are heightened, right? They hear things from further away and feel things like the ground shaking. People who can see can also hear and feel those things too, to a degree, but a lot of it's shut off because of the fact that they're getting all this information from their eyesight. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the most accurate thing in the world, but that would be a thin slice. It's because you have a very minimal amount of information, and yet you can still tell that this is dangerous. And that's why people tell you to follow your gut feeling, because your gut feeling is usually a thin slice. So those are some ideas of how thin slicing works. And that is the key of being an empath, because empaths are basically expert thin slicers. They're people who have a above average ability to thin slice information. Empaths can see patterns that most people cannot see, behavioral patterns. They can make connections where, when talking about personality and behavioral patterns, there's a series of patterns that we fall into, variations of us that we can and can't be. This is where the essence of psychology comes from, believing that there's behavioral patterns for humans and trying to recognize those patterns so that we can treat them or just learn more about them to have a better understanding of who we are. Psychology is already doing work in that. We know, for the most part, that humans have behavioral patterns, but they're more connected than people think that they are. And when people display certain behaviors, it does mean that they're likely to display other behaviors. This is why we have people who can recognize suicidal people weeks before they ever commit suicide. It's because there's certain warning signs that you can see of a person who's on the path of committing suicide. So with empaths, those are people who didn't take those classes. Those are people who didn't read those books. They didn't learn those lessons, but they just have these inferences, these thin slices of these behaviors. And it goes much further than suicide and terrorism. We're talking about, just talking to somebody who's selfish, talking to somebody who likes to use people, talking to somebody who can't stick up for themselves, talking to somebody who's deeply insecure, talking to somebody who is a bad parent, talking to somebody who has an injury that day. It's like you can just look at someone sometimes and get those inferences from them without them giving you any information, or at least not any conscious information. It goes into everything, not just these few things that these people learned. So it's very difficult for empaths to explain their logic and reasoning to people because everyone else just thinks that you're full of shit or you were just making it up or whatever, when you're pretty much just looking at patterns that you see that other people don't see. We learn information through the process of elimination because it's hard to prove things, but it's easy to disprove them. So that's why I'm saying that that's the core of being an empath, since you can't be one without it. So now I've done the best that I can of explaining what an empath actually is. I'm going to go through these symptoms and explain to you how it can all be explained away with what I just said. With logic, reasoning, thin slicing, not this spiritualist, I feel everyone's feelings bullshit. I just have this feeling I'm drawn to people and I'm the bandage of the planet. Pretty much every symptom comes from thin slicing. Now, everything I'm about to do to prove this isn't going to be the best proof to just convince people, and there won't be, because aside from the fact that people just won't listen to information no matter how much you show it to them, the information I show you is the fact that we're going off of people who have no actual understanding of what an empath is, but only their outside view of it. Even people who believe that they're empaths, when they're not, they're just convinced and no one can confirm or deny it, because an empath would have to come in and say, yeah, you're not. Most likely. Because I'm going to show you a way to debunk these false claims of empathy. So just understand that this is all that I can do. This is why I've taken so long to talk about this topic, because explaining it is going to be the toughest thing that I've explained on this channel. But whether or not you take my word for it is totally, entirely up to you, and that's fair. You have every right to not believe me. All right. And the reason why a lot of empaths are stereotyped as an emotional thing is because of the first symptoms that I'm about to read here. It says signs that a person is an empath. Now, I cannot be here all day reading every single word of this shit. This video is going to be like 5 hours long if I read every single sentence. You want to read this shit, you fucking pause it and read it. But yeah, so I'm just summarizing for you guys. So this says signs that a person is an empath. Unconsciously mirroring another person's movements. Unconsciously mirroring another person's emotions. Feeling another person's pain. All of these sound like, wow, you feel people's aura, their presence, and their spirit. That's how you connect with them. It's like this magical connection in the spiritual realm. Like, that's what people think when they read this shit. But what's actually happening is a form of learning. So there are people out there who learn things visually. They learn things by writing it down, repeating it. And some people have to do things to learn it. You have to, in science class, perform the experiment to fully understand it. To learn how to cook something, you have to cook it yourself to really get how it works. For those kind of people, you can unconsciously mirror another person's movements because that's helping you to understand them more. It's putting you in a better frame of mind as that person. Unconsciously mirroring another person's emotions is, again, a way of learning. And that's why empaths can seem very emotional. And some people believe that that's one of the best ways to learn something. Feeling another person's pain. It isn't that you are feeling their pain necessarily. That also can be explained as you needing to feel the pain to understand it. That's not the same as mirroring someone's emotions, because that has to do with like the facial expression and the body language. You understand their facial expression, their body language, you have a better understanding of them. But feeling another person's pain, it means that it can help you internally understand how they feel internally. So if I were to then take on that person's pain and feel it, now I have a better understanding of what they're going through, all the things that it takes for them to be struggling with what they're struggling with right now. Like how people have a hard time explaining themselves when they're upset or thinking straight. If I were to feel as upset as they were, I would have a better understanding of why they're having such a hard time communicating right now in this fictional scenario. So these go back to a lack of control with needing to understand someone else's circumstance. Because the problem here is that if you have to feel someone else's pain, or if it helps you to feel someone else's pain to understand it better, then you're out of control. If you have 4 people yelling and screaming at you, and by instinct as an empath, you are taking on their pain to understand their pain, because by instinct, empaths are trying to understand everything around them. Their brain just takes in information. Then that means that now you are feeling the anger of 4 other people, which then makes you 4 times angrier than them, which is overwhelming. And this is why a lot of empaths are introverts, because they get overwhelmed with emotion. And it's probably due to this being how they learn. And when you read, I'm going to try my best to find something like what I read years ago, because I've been looking into this stuff for years. But I've read articles and stuff written by empaths where they talk about how newbie empaths think that they're supposed to be the bandage of the planet. They think that they're supposed to help other people, and you need to learn how to manage your emotions as an empath, which means it's something that you develop over time, which means, yeah, a newbie is just getting overwhelmed. Just, I feel super happy because all these people around me are happy, or I'm super sad because all these people around me are sad, all this other stuff. That's because that's how you learn. But you have to be able to separate feeling that stuff from being consumed by the feeling of that stuff. And I don't even know how to fully explain how to do that. But I can still feel someone else's pain without letting that consume me to the point where I can't make a rational judgment. And you have to also remember that judging a situation is separate from understanding it. Because you can have this internal understanding subconsciously, but when you're overwhelmed with emotion, you can't make an accurate judgment because you're too fixated on this little detail here or this area there. And it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a lot of exposure to these emotions, trial and error, and mistakes to be able to master that type of handling of emotion. This is mistaken for compassionate empathy. I'll get into that later. So just these first symptoms here are good examples of having to do something to learn it. And as a slight tangent, a lot of people believe that that's the best way to learn something. So now there's so much information in this article that's going to take forever for me to go through. I'm just going to read the summary, which is that it says adults make fewer errors in judging statistical information when they are able to experience the information firsthand, a new study reports. This is in 2021. There's other studies too. All right, so this says a case study method or why experience is the best teacher. This was 8 years ago. It says case study method versus books. The classroom, while textbooks and reference material serves the purpose of teaching concepts, definition, and methods, case study trains you with skills required to do the job. As a result, most higher education institutes swear by using this technique. That's really all that you need to know because, again, if I read this out, I'm going to be here all day. I mean, do you see all this text? But I'm going to link it so that you can read this yourself, and I'm going to go back to that other article later. But the point being is that doing things has been one of the most effective ways to understanding something. So when we're talking about those examples of being an empath, all those come back to doing. Because how else are you supposed to experience emotions without experiencing them? This is an overcomplicated way of basically saying, hey, you understand people better when you mimic their facial expressions. You understand people better when you mimic their movements. You understand them better when you experience their emotions. Because there's so much going on inside of you when you do those things. It gives you a wider perspective of what that person's going through and how much energy is required for that person to deal with those emotions. That's all that this is saying, and yet it's now been misunderstood to be this big spiritual, magical, mystical thing. So the next example says being quicker and more accurate at recognizing emotions. This goes right back to thin slicing. What is the quickest way to recognize an emotion? Thin slicing. It's your subconscious. You could understand that person's upset because the subconscious mind is a very complicated place. And more accurate at recognizing emotions. So again, you're going to be more accurate because all you got to see was the main thing that it was. You didn't get to be distracted by their earrings or their hair or whatever. You just saw their face for a quick second, so you recognize their emotion. For example, that's the best way I can explain that. That's a logical explanation for this empathic symptom. It says being more likely to try new things. That doesn't, I mean, how many people do you know who are willing to try new things? Why would you want to try new things? So you can learn? That makes a lot more sense. If you try a new activity, that's a new experience, it's new information. You learn more and understand more about the world. You get to meet new kinds of people when you try new things, which gives you a better understanding of people. Being more likely to help people in distress. Again, we're talking about an emotional field of information. So we're going back to instincts now. You see animals that are predators when they see a baby that's supposed to be their prey, sometimes take it in and take care of it. It means that humans are capable of having an instinctual level of care. A lot of people have the instinct to help someone when they're in distress. Now, acting on it is a separate thing. Now, if you're more likely to help them, why would that be? Maybe because you have a better understanding of how. Not because being an empath makes you want to help people. But how many times have you been in a situation where you don't know what to do, so you don't do anything? Sounds like there's a logical explanation here behind why people want to do these things. It says being less likely to display aggression. Now, how the fuck are people going to say that empaths are emotional people and they don't display aggression? I can tell you why it says this, but that's just bullshit. There's plenty of empaths who get emotional as fuck. The reason why they're less likely to display aggression is because we're talking about them trying to comfort other people and stuff. It's going to be hard for you to comfort others if you're being aggressive to them. That doesn't make you an empath. That's just naturally what you would do. Because here's the thing. When you're trying to find a fashion model, where would you think to look? You would think to look around some clothing stores or some sort of fucking fashion show, right? If you're trying to find a chef, where you think you're going to look for one? A restaurant. If you're trying to find an empath, where you think you're going to look? Some sort of emotional situation, correct? Because that's all you can think of where they would likely be, which is kind of funny a concept. Where's the emotion? I'm gonna go. I'm there. I'm wherever the danger is, you know? So that's where you're gonna go. That's where you're gonna get most of your information on how they behave, right? Chefs, models, firefighters, whatever, can act in all sorts and kinds of ways when they're in the comfort of their own home. But a lot of times, a fashion model is going to have like a fierce look to her if you're looking at her in the area that you're looking for her in. You know, a chef is going to look very concentrated if he's in the middle of doing his job. Firefighter is going to look very like tense and have this brave kind of persona when they're walking into a building to fight the fire. Doesn't mean that at home they just stand like that all day while watching, you know, their soap operas or the sports channel or whatever. They're relaxed. So same thing goes for empaths. If you're looking for them in these situations, confirmation bias is going to show you all the ways that they behave in those situations. And yeah, they're less likely to be aggressive because they're dealing with someone who's emotional right now. If I'm literally in a room with someone trying to comfort them, why am I going to be aggressive to that person? Now, if somebody needs a push to do something, then I might be more aggressive with them. It depends. I have to fill out the situation and recognize what behavioral pattern will be the best to get the result that I need when dealing with that person. If they've made so much progress and they're starting to slip, I might be more aggressive, like, no, you're not gonna backslide. You know what you need to do. You need to do this thing. That's me being more aggressive. But if I'm just now talking to them for the first time and they're telling me why they have all these problems and why they can't dig themselves out of this hole, I'm not gonna be like, yeah, you need to blah, 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 blah. The point is, you're probably going to see me being a lot softer or something in those fields when talking to people. I think that's it. That's the dumbest list of... Also, I've seen lists that are much longer than this, so I'm surprised that that's as long as it is. Now it just says benefits and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to archive this for the video and look up another list. Now, I read 30 traits. So here's 30 fucking symptoms. We're going to be here all day. I'm going to try to speed through them. We'll see. You have a deep sense of knowing. That's thin slicing. You're an effective listener and communicator. I mean, how the fuck are you supposed to understand something if you don't listen to the information you're getting? And if you have a high level of understanding, then that means you're going to be good at communicating what you understand. Most likely. You get my point? It all ties in. It says you get overwhelmed in public places. I already talked about that before. If you have to learn things by experiencing it, then you're going to get overwhelmed in a public place because you're experiencing everyone's emotions to learn where they're coming from, to understand it. And you haven't learned how to control that yet. You feel other people's emotions, pains, illness, and stresses. That goes back to the other example, number 3 that I just gave. It says you experience mood swings and may be unpredictable and needy. I mean, again, all that stuff. I mean, you can describe so many people that way. The mood swings, you taking on other people's emotions, that could be explained by that. You having all these intense emotions can cause you to have mood swings because maybe you need to feel them in a more intensive way to be able to communicate them. It says be unpredictable. You're unpredictable because other people are empaths and they don't know what the fuck's going on with you. They don't understand your behavioral pattern. It says and needy. Again, if people think that emotional people are needy, you need someone to comfort you. Wouldn't it make sense that if an empath is overwhelmed by emotion, just from every day walking around experiencing people's pain, it helps people to be comforted when they're in a high state of emotion, when they're very upset or something. You would be considered needy because you would need help more often if you're looking for outside help. So that's how those things can be explained away with logic. It says you're sensitive to chaos in TV shows, radio programs, movies, in real life. Again, that's if you're like a newbie and you don't know what the fuck you're doing. When people say empaths are these spiritual people just take on the aura and essence, a fucking TV show character doesn't have an aura. They don't have a soul, okay? You can maybe claim that they do. You can say everyone has a soul. Okay, whatever. But the soul that people are talking about, fictional characters don't fucking have. So that kind of blows the theory out the water that empaths are these spiritual beings and stuff. And you're literally just learning and understanding the character's emotions through mimicry. So then it says you're prone to illness and physical pain. I mean, if you are taking on emotions more, you're getting emotionally drained, which means that your energy is getting drained, which means that you're not going to have enough energy to do things in the day. So it's going to be more likely that you're going to get hurt. Also, introverts get less sunlight. Introverts who keep themselves or stay indoors, they don't go out a lot, you're not getting as much sunlight. So you're literally lacking nutrients from the atmosphere. So that's going to give you less energy too. Again, this can all be explained away. It says others are drawn to trust you like a magnet. It's because people are making thin slices of who you are. People take advantage of empathetic people. I've talked about this a million times before. People can spot empathetic people, at least subconsciously, because most people are not very empathetic. Most people are not going to care about your problems. So if you say or do anything that is something that an empathetic person would do, that immediately fires off people's subconscious to be like, that's the person who I can trust because they said this one time. Or maybe even just listening when most people don't can give people that idea. So then they're going to be drawn to you. They're going to be like, okay, I can trust you because you care. And that's why it's so dangerous to just care about any and everyone, because then everybody uses you. You're not banished for the planet. You're getting used by the fucking planet, okay? Like a fucking band-aid. You're going to get used and thrown away when you've done your job. So moving on, it says, you feel constant fatigue. Being overwhelmed by information and by emotion gives you fatigue. You have a tendency toward addictive behavior. I mean, the whole idea of wanting to understand information anywhere you can is addictive. So obviously, you're probably going to have an addictive tendency or two because you were already born being addicted to something, which is learning about humanity and people. So if you find somebody who's addicted to one thing, they're probably going to be addicted to another. Same goes with empaths. We can move on. It says you are involved in healing, holistic health, and wellness. If you can help someone who's dealing with something, then that means you really understand them. Now, I'm not saying that empaths help people because it's a challenge, okay? But I'm making the point that it is a method to learn. A common phrase that people say is that if you can teach something, then you actually know it. So it makes sense that empaths would be healing or holistic health or wellness, that they would display these things, because being able to do that gives you a better understanding of what it takes to heal someone, what it takes to help someone. And because empaths are taking on other people's emotions, there is a theory you could throw out there where you could say maybe they want to help people so much because a lot of people want to help others but just don't know how. So maybe as empaths grow up as babies, you know, when babies are absorbing information and it warps their personality, your parents are supposed to want to take care of you, right? And even with a lot of abused kids, they only get abused out of the baby stage. When they're a baby, they're just loved and showered with all this love and care. So that could possibly teach an empath to want to do those things for people, because for the most fundamental years of their life, they were surrounded by people who wanted to help them and take care of them. This means that the first thing they learned how to mimic was empathy. Also, as a side note, this doesn't mean that they had good childhoods. I'm talking about infancy. The basic things a parent has to do in order for their child to survive could be the first thing that they pick up on, which influences their empathy. So it completely shaped their worldview. That would make it more likely for that to happen to empaths. Now, there's going to be some who don't grow up that way, and I'll get back to that later, because you don't have to be this super emotional, wanting to help everybody person to be an empath. There's different types of empaths. But that's why most of them end up that way, because that's how they were fucking raised. It says you have a rabid curiosity in seeking the truth. I mean, this is one of the other fucking symptoms we just read. You know why already. Thin slicing, wanting to understand things, learning. You were taken care of as a child, so that makes you want to take care of other people, which also gives you a better way to learn. So if you have a rabid curiosity for seeking the truth, you're addicted to wanting to understand information, etc., etc., etc. You are interested in spirituality and metaphysical arts. Interested is not the same as being that thing. You can be interested in all sorts of things as an empath, but you can't for a second equate to being spiritual as being an empath, because that's a fucking religion. So you being religious should not be a factor. That should be a separate thing. You can be an empath and also be religious. It should not be a fucking symptom. And I don't like the fact that they lump that in with metaphysical arts, because they're not the same thing. And so yes, it says the unexplainable, the paranormal, the metaphysics, but most people read this and just think of spirituality like, I am spiritual, you know, I believe in people's auras and chakras and the crystals and the witchcraft, and I just want that. Like, that's not empathism. But most of these fucking people think they're empaths because people define the shit like this. When you look at the actual rest of the definition, it talks about unexplainable, paranormal, metaphysics, all that stuff. Have a deep sense of spirituality, not necessarily religion. It says it there for anybody who thinks that I'm wrong. It says even though they may lean towards such in order to find a sense of belonging. And that's a big reason why people are spiritual these days. Being interested in it could make you one, because you could be interested in anything and be a fucking empath. Whole point is learning, understanding people. Spirituality is a type of person. Certain people are spiritual. Of course, you're going to want to learn about them. You feel drawn to ancient and indigenous cultures. I mean, again, that goes back to learning, understanding. Why would you not want to look at an ancient culture? Those are types of people. It says you have ancestral lineage to empaths. And yes, it would make sense that if an empath has a kid, they're more likely to have like an empathic child, because we're talking about thin slicing. So if you have a high level of intelligence, then there's a chance that your kid could have that high level of intelligence in whatever area. That's why you have families who are like lawyers, or families who are mechanics and stuff like that. Things can be like passed down, and then based off of your environment, you can learn to some degree, but it's not gonna be this ancestral lineage that can be proven, because again, takes one to know one. It says you are a quiet achiever and strong leader. I mean, again, we're talking about people who are emotionally overwhelmed. So if you're overwhelmed by emotion and exhausted, you're probably going to be quiet because you're going to be more introverted. Now, the reason why you want to do the hard work behind the scenes, as it says here, is because people are not trustworthy. And you can learn that through understanding how people behave and operate. It says they will often be found in positions of leadership due to their ability to be focused, organized, and support. I mean, again, you can be an empath and be that. You could also not. All these are like that for the most part, where you don't have to be all of these things to be one. It says you possess creative talents. Creativity is a lot of mechanisms going off in your brain. You have a highly active brain if you're an empath. So yeah, most likely you're going to be creative because you're able to make all these connections that people can't see, which is a big part of creativity. So that's more likely. Like it says poets, designers, understanding concepts and stuff, that has to do with understanding. It says you have a love of nature and animals. It goes back to understanding. Understanding nature helps us to understand ourselves. We are animals. We are in nature. It says you find water to have powerful cleansing properties. That could have to do with you being highly sensitive in different senses. If you hear water dropping a certain way, maybe it can make you feel better. Swimming in the sea, things like that, you can feel like a lot of it's mind over matter. It says floating in the pool, walking in the rain. Your senses are heightened, you know? So you can hear it in a way that other people can't. You can feel it in a way that other people can't. And it then gives you, sometimes it can block out other senses and give you some peace, because the sound of the rain or the water closes off your ears to hearing all the other noises from all the other people around you. You're just in this calm, because empaths, their brain is just constantly firing off. Sometimes having your senses clouded gives you a sense of peace. You have a need for solitude. This goes against the whole leadership thing. So just remember, like I said, you don't have to be this to be an empath, but this is a symptom. So needing for solitude, leadership, or being an extrovert, you have a need for solitude. So that's because, again, you can get overwhelmed by people's emotions because of everything I've already explained. You often experience boredom, are easily distracted, and spend a lot of time daydreaming. That's because your brain is doing so much work and understanding so many things. So that daydreaming is you understanding information, making connections in your head, things like that. Because daydreaming could be defined as so many different things, but that's usually what's going on. If you're easily distracted, it's because you see one little thing or you get an inference of something, and then you make all these connections in your head based off of that other people just don't see. And you experiencing boredom could be from you just not getting enough stimulation from something, because what if it's that you already understand a lot of it? Then you're probably going to be bored because you want to learn new information, because it goes back to that addiction of understanding that empaths have. You are an adventure seeker and loves travel and spontaneity. This goes against the introvert thing, which is another example of how you don't have to be all these things. But this goes back to wanting to learn. Having these experiences will teach you more things about different cultures, different people. It says you feel weighted down by clutter and are conscious of energy and flow. So that's because people who have a messy mind tend to have that show in other areas. It can be hard for them to be neat and organized, which is contrary to a previous symptom that I read out to you about the whole leadership thing. But the point is, you could have that problem where you you are messy and stuff because your mind is messy. So the more you clear up your environment, the better it can help you clear up your mind. It's something to watch out for. But that just connects to the way that your brain functions. And that goes back to like ADHD and things like that. Like it's hard for people to process in their head all the different things that they need to do to organize and clean if they have limited methods to organization. If they don't have enough boxes or compartments for stuff, how are they supposed to organize all the things that they have? It just makes it harder and harder. There's so many logical ways to explain that. It says you're a rule breaker. I mean, obviously, if all these people want to not judge others and they talk about giving the benefit of the doubt, that's what you're supposed to do, everyone thinks. And you're not going to do that because you have a fundamental understanding of how these different things are working. So you are going to judge, you're going to have your own opinion and theories, and you're not going to give the benefit of the doubt because you know what the fuck's going on. Then you're kind of breaking the rules right there on how to be a human. But anyway, it says routine, repetition, rules can become mundane for creative empath, blah, blah, blah. That goes back into the other things that we already talked about, like with boredom and all that other stuff. You have great enthusiasm and appreciation for life. Well, it's easy to appreciate life when you start to understand what goes into creating life, what goes into being alive. The more you understand it, the more you appreciate it, and that goes for anything. When people are exposed to stuff, they see it as more than what they thought it was at first glance. And you can be enthusiastic about it because now you have this information, you're excited to share the information because that'll show that you know the information even more. It stimulates your brain. It says you are a humanitarian peacemaker and or a mediator. So again, that goes back to you understanding how counterproductive it is for people to be the opposite of those things. To not care about each other is a race to the bottom for our species. If two people are at odds and you see the solution to their problem, you might want to intervene and tell them the solution because, one, if you can get these people to get along, that gives you a new level of understanding how to get people to get along in that situation. That's something that you want to learn to do because then that'll give you a better idea of understanding people in a more complex way or being a mediator. Now, that doesn't mean that that's your core motivation, but that's what draws you to it because you're like, oh, here's something that I know. Let's see if I can put it into practice. It's just a lot easier to help someone if you know what to do. So it goes back to that. It says you are sensitive to antique, vintage, or secondhand items. That means that you could just recognize patterns about the history of those things. And you can make so many connections from looking at stuff that's old or seeing the difference between how people used to use something and the modern version of it now could interest you. It says you are a lucid dreamer. That goes back to you having a very highly active mind. So you could have dreams where they're very similar and close to reality because of how active your brain is. And people are still trying to understand dreams to this day. We don't know why we have them or where they come from in a sense. So that's a topic that you can't dive too much into with empaths, but I would say the understanding part ties into the whole lucid dreaming or the active mind. It says you are a lover, not a fighter. And it's not true because that goes back to you being a leader and stuff. Leaders are not lovers. Like they have to make tough decisions. If you're the boss of something or you're the leader of some sort of group, you have to do the hard thing. Sometimes you have to fight. So again, you don't have to be this to be an empath, but the easier way to a result could seem to be having compassion or love for something rather than fighting against it, to just let it happen, make a pathway for it to happen. And that's why you choose that route. You could be considered a visionary, entrepreneur, and or problem solver. It all goes back to understanding thin slices, seeing the pathway towards a goal. So of course you could want to do those things because your brain understands it. So now I could read other websites to show these symptoms, but this is like, a big list. You're going to see this a lot more. This is how you can understand why people have such a big misconception of empathism, because so much of this, it can be so fun to think it's this magical thing. You're just born with a superpower and you're just a superhero and oh my God, it's like I got to be Clark Kent and hide my super from people. It's like, that's not what it is. So we're going to move on from this. So now we're going to get into the misconceptions that people have of empathism. As I told you before, when searching for the difference between HSP and empath, pretty much all these websites got it wrong. And I will prove this later, but they're wrong. It says, again, I'm just going to look at the summaries here because I have a few websites open that we can read. And to go through all these, I'm going to be here all day. But it says, while empaths and HSPs sound similar, they are somewhat different. Julie Bedgelin argues that most empaths are HSPs, but not all HSPs are empaths. It says Elaine Aron's characterization of HSPs as having higher than average levels of empathy than all HSPs. So I either showed you the whole thing about her book, Elaine Aron, before, or I'm going to insert it here awkwardly, okay? Now, more about Dr. Elaine's definition of HSP is on this website, so I'm going to read from here because that means it's possibly going to be more legitimate. It says, a psychiatrist and an empath, I often get asked, what is the difference between empaths and highly sensitive people? Following are the similarities and areas of overlap. It doesn't mean this person is an empath, but that's the only way you're really going to understand this stuff is to find one and ask them. It says, empaths share all traits of what Dr. Elaine Aron has called highly sensitive people, HSP. That I don't agree with, and I will literally debunk that. So this isn't a direct quote from that empath, hence it not being in quotes, but if that is what they said, then they're wrong. And I'm just gonna get to it later. It says, or HSPs. These include a low threshold for stimulation, the need for alone time, sensitivity to light, sound, and smell, and an aversion to large groups. It also takes highly sensitive people longer to wind down after a busy day, since their ability to transition from high stimulation to being quiet is slower. And then it finally says, highly sensitive people are typically introverts, while empaths can be introverts or extroverts, although most are introverts. Empaths share a highly sensitive person's love of nature and quiet environments, their desire to help others, and their rich inner life. However, empaths take the experience of a highly sensitive person much further. We can sense subtle energy called, oh God. So this person is full of shit. Eastern healing traditions, they actually absorb it from other people. They don't absorb shit. So this is going to go into my misconceptions. I'm going to cut the video here. Alright, so since we've covered the whole thing about Elaine's book at this point somehow, they keep bringing that up, and you'll see it more as I scroll through these. But it says here, all empaths are HSPs, but not all HSPs are empaths. That's not true. It says, in other words, being highly sensitive has an emotional dimension to it, and many HSPs would qualify as empaths. Here we go. This one makes a little bit more sense because it says many and not all. I hate it when people say all. Also, while, and it's not that technical thing like, okay, technically not everybody, but like 99.9%. No, like the vast majority are not HSP. HSP revolves around sympathy. Empathism revolves around understanding and learning, and everyone's got it backwards. The definition between empathy and sympathy. It says also, while most HSPs and empaths are introverts, many more empaths than HSPs are extroverts as well. So this one might be interesting, is not misleading. We'll see. Highly sensitive people are typically introverts, whereas empaths can be introverts and extroverts. Empaths are highly sensitive. I'll read that. It says highly sensitive people are typically introverts, while empaths can be introverts or extroverts, although most are introverts. Although most are introverts. It's like they're going back and forth. Some of them are saying empaths are more so extroverts, empaths are more so introverts. No, they don't, nobody fucking knows, dude. All right, so let's get into these misconceptions. These 3 websites. It says, what does it mean to be an empath? Is this the one with the book? Let me type Aaron. Okay, good. So on this website, psycholive.org, it says, am I an empath? It says, ask yourself, have I been labeled as too emotional or overly sensitive? You know how many people that can apply to? Every baby that's ever existed, ever. It says, if a friend is distraught, do I start feeling it too? Again, every baby ever. When you make a face, they make a face. Are my feelings easily hurt? You can just apply this to babies. Am I emotionally drained by crowds? Required time alone to revive? All right, so you know how many people can be emotionally drained by crowds? Introverts. You know who else can be called too emotional? Introverts. You know, that's why they become introverted, because they're not accepted. You know who else? Autistic people. All these can be explained with other types of mental disorders or mental challenges and stuff, like with being introverted. That's a challenge that some people face where they just can't be around a lot of people and all this other stuff. It says, do my nerves get frayed by noise, smells, or excessive talk? That's HSP. We already talked about that. Those are people who have heightened senses. It says, do I prefer taking my own car places so that I can leave when I please? That's such a specific example. I'm gonna get into why these are bullshit in a second. Do I overeat to cope with emotional stress? I mean, you can tie that to depression or to people who are very emotional. It says, am I afraid of becoming engulfed by intimate relationships? Do you know how many people worry about that and how many people do it? So The point that I'm making is none of these have anything to do with each other. You can't say, oh, you got to be most of these and not most of them, because there's no connection. Going back to empathism, when you recognize patterns, there's not a single fucking pattern in these things. Other than throwing emotion in each example, maybe. Just emotion. Doesn't matter what kind. You're too emotional, you start feeling it too. Feelings easily hurt. Emotionally drained. Nerves, that's an emotional thing. Go on, I please. Pleasing myself. Emotion. Emotional stress, intimate relationships, like literally the relationship is the only emotional like aspect of this example. That's the connection. It's fucking awful. You can't learn anything from this. So this whole thing here that people are reading to understand if they're a fucking empath are wrong. This could mean that you're an HSP for sure. It could mean you're autistic. It could mean that you're an introvert or something maybe. But it definitely doesn't make you an empath because it has nothing to do with understanding information, which I've already proven is the core of being an empath. You don't need to understand information to know if your feelings are hurt. You know, like what the fuck? Almost every example on that other page that I read out to you, which is why I read you the symptoms first and then these misconceptions, is because we're all in connection with understanding to some degree. I was able to draw that. Here I can't. Feelings hurt. You can understand information without getting your feelings hurt. You can understand information without having your nerves frayed by noises and smells. Like, rather than your nerves being frayed, an empath are intrigued by them. I can hear the rain. I can hear the thunder. I can feel the sun on my skin. I want to think about that feeling and why is it that it gives me this specific feeling? Is it a good feeling? Is it a bad one? That's more so empathic, not my nerves are frayed. So I'm going to move on from this bullshit. Difference between highly sensitive people and empaths, it says, learn different... Is this the one with the book? Oh, this is the one that I read to you. So let me go through this real quick. It says, however, empaths take the experience of highly sensitive person much further. We can sense subtle energy called Shakti or prana in Eastern healing traditions and actually absorb it from other people. You're not absorbing it. There's this thing in psychology. I don't know what it's called. I'll try to find it for this video. Where if someone's upset, the other person calms down. You don't have to be an empath to do that. If I can find some examples, I'll just post them on the screen and you can pause and read if you want. But it's literally a manipulation tactic even when you're in an argument with someone. If you get calm, the other person usually gets angry. If you get angry, the other person usually gets calm. There's so many other reasons for why that's the case. Absorbing people's emotion. People want to be understood. And so usually through mimicry, if you are starting to feel someone else's emotion, it makes them feel as if they're understood so it can calm them down. That doesn't mean that you're absorbing it. And so the problem is that when you're looking at this from the outside, it looks like if an empath goes up to somebody who's crying and they're upset and then the person feels better, but now the empath is sad, they absorbed their emotion. But what's actually happening and the steps that are being taken behind the scenes is that the empath is sitting down with someone who's upset. This person's crying. They're talking about all their problems. One, the empath is listening. That starts to make the person feel better. Two, the empath could be giving them advice because they understand the situation. So they're like, oh, well, what about this, that? Three, they know what to say even if they know there isn't any advice they can give the person depending on their circumstance, they can still say things that they understand will make the person feel better because they come to understand these things about humans and these patterns of what to say in those scenarios. Just repeating back how someone feels in your own words can make them feel better because again, it makes them feel understood. If you can put in your own words, they're like, wow, you really do get it because you're basically teaching them how they feel. And again, if you can teach something, that means you actually learn it. So that's on the sad person's side, the non-empath. But what people aren't misrepresenting as absorbing emotion is what's happening on the empath side, which is at the same time as they say all the right things and they understand what to do and blah, 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 the empath is also understanding how that person feels through the mimicry. So as they say the right things and stuff, this person gets calmer and at the same time, they're now mimicking their emotion internally, externally, how they move, how they make their expressions, how they feel on the inside to understand them even more. And so now it looks like their emotions have switched. It looks like the empath has absorbed their information, but all the empath is doing is just learning more about this person while speaking to them because they can't help themselves because they're addicted to learning. Something can look a certain way at first glance when there's so much more going on behind the scenes. So this whole absorbing people thing just isn't the case. It just looks that way. It says absorb it from other people in different environments into our own bodies. Jesus Christ, they make it sound so fucking magical. It says highly sensitive people don't typically do that. The capacity, because they're not addicted to learning. They have a heightened sense of emotion. That's the difference. If you have a heightened level of sensitivity to things, that doesn't mean that you're addicted to understanding it. It doesn't mean that you have an understanding of it. It just means you're feeling all the shit that you don't understand. That's HSP. So of course they're not going to absorb other people's feelings because they don't even know what the fuck the person's feeling. They don't need to learn through experience because that's not what's happening to them. It says this capacity allows us to experience the energy around us. Oh, Jesus Christ. It's not energy. Or else, if it was energy, then again, why are empaths able to do the same thing with fucking fictional characters that don't exist? Or stories that they were never there for? You don't feel the essence of the spirits told in a story from a different location in another country. You're mimicking the fucking emotions that those people felt in those stories, including emotions, physical sensations in extremely deep ways. What the fuck does that even mean? And so we energetically internalize the feelings of pain of others. Ugh, Jesus Christ. So the point is you get how bullshit that is, or at least hopefully you do. Gonna exit out of this. Gonna exit out of this. Here it says an empath will be more sensitive to the emotions of others in the room. Yeah, because of everything I've already explained. Thin slicing, wanting to understand how everyone feels, mimicking their emotions, how they maneuver, all that stuff is another thing that can overwhelm you. If you're trying to mimic the fucking movements of 20 people in a room and their facial expressions, or at least you have the instinct to do so, you're fucking overwhelmed because, I mean, you can't do it all at once. You're only one person. So then you start mimicking it in your head, in the subconscious. In the subconscious, you can picture the different facial expressions and all this stuff. All these things are going on in your mind while trying to have a fucking conversation with someone in a room, you know? So you're overwhelmed. Just wanted to make that point. The HSP will be more quickly overstimulated, leading to slower sensory processing, overwhelm, and greater difficulty in connecting with others in the moment. They have a greater difficulty because they don't understand what the fuck they're feeling. They have to process it because they don't understand it. They don't have the thin slice, they just got the stimulation, if that makes sense. Because the thin slice is logical. It's like thin slicing is the sixth sense, and with HSP people, they're overly stimulated by the other five senses. Alright, so let's look at all those other things. Alright, so here's a few of those other examples that I clicked on. So now we're looking at the ones that from first glance, that little sentence preview, it at least has a chance of making sense. Because they didn't say every single person who's an empath is a HSP. They're literally supposed to be two different things. Alright, so introverts. It says being an introvert is genetic, and it involves differences in how the brain processes dopamine, the reward chemical. People who are born as introverts simply don't feel as rewarded by external stimuli such as parties or chit chat. All right, so this person is giving you the actual definition of introverts. That's a whole other topic for another day. But long story short, people's concept of what being introverted is isn't the same as the actual definition of introvert. So the actual definition, yes, is genetic, but you can be a quote-unquote introvert without being one, if that makes sense. So I can't get into that today. I should make a video on it though. It says if you're a highly sensitive HSP, you're much more likely to be an introvert than an extrovert. It goes back to Elaine Aron's book. 70% of HSPs are also introverts. It says, so it makes sense why they're often confused for one or another. And yes, that is true. It's a lot easier to tell if someone's an introvert because we're talking about the five senses and having a highly stimulated sense of that. So those are things that you can test and measure. But the sixth sense, which I think is attributed to thin slicing, is something that you can't fucking attribute well when we're talking about emotional thin slicing. Not thin slicing things that are there, like how many hats were the people wearing in the picture we showed you for 30 seconds, but how many people felt angry in this conversation. How can you prove something like that? Anyone can lie and say that they weren't upset. It says the word empath has been taking on a new meaning lately. Yep. At one point, it was used mostly in science fiction to describe a person with paranormal abilities to understand the mental, emotional state of others. And I think that's because people realize that humans can do the same thing, which is when people started to take it more seriously as a like real life thing. It says, although many people still associate empaths with a spiritual component, because you know that's how it started in science fiction. It says today the word has become more mainstream. And so that's my point right there. When people looked at the fictional characters, yes, they were spiritual because spirits exist in their world. There's a magic system. But in real life, none of that shit is proven. So for you to just assume it goes back to religion and belief systems and all this shit that you have no actual evidence for. And it goes against the core idea of being an empath. Empaths are open to logical information because they want to learn. So when you tell them, yeah, it's probably not spirituality, they're not going to say, you're wrong, you don't know. I have all these empath friends. They're going to say, that's interesting. Why do you say that? Jesus Christ. Anyway, says here's what that looks like. Empaths would say they're not just noticing other feelings. The experience is often one of absorbing. See, this person doesn't get this. They were pretty much right with the HSP and the introvert part because, like I said, you can understand that in a study since those are things we can prove. But once you get into emotion, it all falls apart. So sadly, this is the same as everything else, but I'll go through some of the key parts anyway. But this, I would say, is another page that's a misconception of empathism. This may even include physical symptoms. It says, when overwhelmed with stressful emotions, empaths may experience panic attacks, depression, chronic fatigue, and physical symptoms that defy traditional medical diagnosis, she writes. It's because they're experiencing these mental things that most people experience more intensely, so they're going to have more intense reactions. It says, for empaths, this ability is both a gift and a curse. It can be hard because many empaths feel they cannot turn it off, or it takes them years to develop ways to turn it down when needed. See, that's what I was telling you about. Now, for empaths to say that they're just absorbing others, they literally think that they have a power. I have the power to absorb your pain. I have to learn how to turn it off or control this overwhelming ability. You're not fucking controlling the ability to absorb someone's pain. You're still able to help people. You're learning how to stop mimicking other people's emotions in order to understand it. Doesn't that make sense? If I don't understand how depression works and I keep fucking mimicking someone who's depressed, like the internal emotion, not the external, that too, but more so if I'm mimicking all the different emotions that comes along with that form of depression, eventually I've learned everything I need to learn about it and I don't need to keep doing it. It's like if you use a certain recipe for something you're cooking. You don't have to keep looking at the recipe if you've made it 50 times. You know it by heart at this point. So you can just skip that part of the lesson, you know? You don't have to work out your math problems if you already know how to do it in your head. It says, at the same time, an empath's ability to absorb feelings is their greatest strength. It allows them to understand others. See, that part is correct. It allows them to understand others, but they're not absorbing it. What the fuck kind of chemical reaction do you think is happening? You think someone's absorbing someone's essence and then it shoots into their fucking brain? They're like, that's the answer. I touch something or I touch it emotionally and then it goes into my body, into my brain, and I understand it. Like, what the fuck is that? That is not what's happening. You don't convert people's essence into information. It says, and connect deeply with them. You can't prove whether or not you're going to connect with someone. Either you connect with them or you don't. One person can connect with someone and they don't connect back. We know this because people look at YouTubers and feel this emotional connection with someone who they don't fucking know. You could feel like you're their best friend for years and they don't even know who you are. They've never met you. They've never spoken to you. They don't even know that you're a follower. They don't even know that you're a fan. So one person can connect and the other one doesn't. That's how we know that you're not connecting through this aura bullshit conversion into information. And you can easily prove this with a study. If you want to disprove that empaths are taking people's essence and converting it into information, blindfold someone who calls himself an empath, have them just sit in a room with another person, and then have them try to absorb how that person's feeling. But have both parties express how the other one's feeling outside of the room. Like, they sit there for 5 minutes just absorbing their aura. Then when both people leave, you ask one person, honestly, how did you feel today? Go through your whole day and how it's affected you now. Like, and if the person had a bad day and the empath can't fucking tell, disproven, blindfold them, let them absorb absorb all that aura, bruh. So anyway, it says it's also what makes them extraordinary caretakers, friends. Well, you need to have some intelligence to be a caretaker. How are you going to take care of something you don't understand? How are you going to be a friend to someone if you don't understand how to be a friend to them? Different people need different things in a friendship. How are you going to be a good partner to someone if you don't understand how to be a good partner to them? Different partners need different things from people, especially when others understand and appreciate their gifts. That means that you're getting the affirmation that you did it right. They especially are able to, understand others when they're appreciated. No. That means that you're especially able to tell that you understood them when they appreciate it. Empaths can be introverts or extroverts. Absorbing emotions most likely happens by picking up on subtle social emotional cues. Does that sound like a fucking absorption to you or an understanding? Picking up on subtle social and emotional cues sounds a lot like thin slicing people and then internalizing them. That sounds like mimicry. An unconscious process that empaths often can't control because they're fucking addicted. And you want to know why it's hard? First of all, you have two theories of why it's hard for empaths to understand where this is coming from. An empath cannot learn what it means to be an empath through other empaths, which is the most effective way for them to understand humans, is by being in front of a human with a certain mentality. But empaths are so rare, your chances of doing that are slim to fucking none. So all you can go off of is your own complexities and what's getting in your way, all that stimulation from all the people around you, all the things that you've come to learn about everyone else, all the misinformation people tell you about empaths, all the misinformation people tell you about themselves. All these distractions, your imagination, your creativity, stops you from learning from yourself, not to mention your own personal bias when looking at yourself, being in denial, and all these other concepts that can cloud your judgment within. So of course you're not going to know where all these little unconscious processes are coming from because you're spending so much time with all these other distractions in your mind. If you could just have 5 empaths sitting in front of you, you would be able to understand that process a lot better because now you're looking at it from the outside. And you get to go through the same process as before. You get to mimic them and recognize the behavioral pattern. You get to hear what they're saying and discern that information inside of your head. You get to look at them and recognize behavior patterns with their emotions, like their facial expressions, their movements. You can't do any of that because you can't find any. So the other theory is that you're not an empath, and you don't understand because you don't have the understanding. No matter how much time it takes, you'll never understand the process because it takes a high level of understanding to do so. Now, you don't have to be an empath to think of these things, but you would have to be exposed to a lot of this type of information to come to this conclusion as someone who's not an empath because you don't understand it. You're not a part of it. It isn't you, so you got to get the information from somewhere to draw this conclusion. Processes feeling very deeply, highly sensitive people. It says processing things very deeply and noticing connections that others don't notice, sometimes becoming overwhelmed or overstimulated because your brain is processing so much input, especially highly stimulating environments like a party or a business classroom. Again, all this is the 5 senses. Picking up on emotional cues like empaths and feeling a deep degree of empathy for others. Noticing small and subtle things that others overlook. That's thin slicing. And again, if you do have heightened senses, you know what's similar to the 6th sense? Perception. If you use your eyes to look at things and you have a heightened sense of sight, you can probably see things that other people don't see. It's pretty hard for somebody who needs glasses to see micro expressions if they're not wearing them. So if you have better eyesight, you'll probably see more micro expressions in a person, or you'll be able to understand kinesics more, or physiognomy, which is the understanding of certain facial features, like I said, facial expressions and movements, subtle movements that people have, like microscopic. But if you can't see that well, you're fucked. So that heightened sense helps you. There's things in people's voices, their tone, the way that they say things, and the pacing that has to do with their intention and how they mean things. But if you can't hear very well, you're fucked. So I'm sure that there's probably going to be some study one day where people who have a better sense of seeing and hearing and stuff are more likely to be HSP or something because you have heightened senses. It says HSPs can be introverts, extroverts. It's likely that most, if not all, HSPs are also empaths. That's not true. They're just going off of what they've heard and they're just like, well, most, if not all. You don't fucking know, so don't say it. Empaths and HSPs may turn out to be 2 sides of a single trait. They're not. They're completely different. Again, it's the 5 senses versus the 6th sense. Moving on, whatever. Want to know key differences between an empath and a highly sensitive person. Oh my god. Like most things in life, sensitivity exists on a spectrum. That's true. It says, think of narcissists, sociopaths, and others with antisocial personality disorder as the scale's black and darkness shades of gray. People are unconscious. They're also ones most likely to have remorse. They are the farthest, darkest endpoints of sensitivity spectrum. Hannibal Lecter's world population. It says, this is the colorful part of the spectrum. Journey through the... I was just giving this. I'm gonna come back to this after this next part of the video because this is complete bullshit. These people think that sociopaths, psychopaths, all that stuff is on the dark spectrum and empaths are on like the colorful rainbow. They of course gotta attach the fucking rainbow to the spectrum. There are these two spectrums that are polar opposite. I'm gonna read this shit out to you after and you're gonna see why I'm so fed up with this bullshit. So let's get into the next segment. All right, so I'm going to come back to this because I am sick of everyone thinking they're an empath, and I'm sick of them thinking that empaths are special unicorn beings, you know, like a leprechaun. Like if you're a leprechaun, they'll lead you to the pot of gold. And it's like they're basically describing people who are above average in a skill. And many of us are. But because you don't see people that often who can do these other things that I was listing as well, then you think, oh, it's so special. It's some people are better at doing shit than others. It's ridiculous. Like we shouldn't be worshiping talent or skill, you know? Because that's how you get to a whole generation of people thinking that fucking empath is a magical, mystical being. Oh, man. So back to my point of the whole skill thing, they're just people who understand emotional information above average. That's it. And as someone said earlier in one of the many websites I was reading to you guys, it says it can be at like various degrees. There are some people who understand information slightly above average, so they would be like a lesser empath or whatever. And there would be some people who understand emotional information highly above average, and they would be a very intelligent empath, right? So it just comes in different levels. Just like how you have some psychopaths who are more extreme than others and stuff like that. You could say the same thing about any sort of like mentality. Some people who are super addicted to something and some people who are just a little bit addicted to something. And remember, empaths can be addicted to information. So you have some who are extremely addicted to information and you have some who aren't. So you have to keep all that in mind. But now it is time for me to debunk once and for fucking all why this whole empaths are emotional people who feel things and just want to help everybody and take in all this spiritual stuff and just want to be everyone's friend and they just want to heal the world and help the world and be the bandage of the fucking planet is wrong. And is why that other page that was talking about how there's a spectrum for dark people, you know, sociopaths, psychopaths, and a spectrum for rainbow people, not even light but rainbow, which are empaths, HSP, it's also fucking bullshit. And it's because there's different types of empaths out there and we can't fucking learn shit about them because people can't even decide who is and isn't an empath to do the studies. Pretty much everything is on a spectrum, I've come to learn. So that means so are empaths. So I always had this theory where you could be an empath and be a dark, disturbing person. Because if an altruistic empath exists, just like an altruistic human, that means that there's another equivalent on the other side, most likely, right? So some sort of equal but opposite equivalent, which is why I always said there's different types of empaths. And so what I was referring to, but not bringing up because I wanted to do a video like this before I ever talked about it, was that there has to be some sort of version of an empath. Someone who would be like a narcissistic empath, a sociopathic empath, a psychopathic empath, which sounds so contradictory when you think about the basic mainstream definition of an empath. How can you want to be the bandage of the planet and you're a fucking sociopath? But you want to know what I ended up learning about that confirms my fucking theory? We're going to Psych Central for this, okay? There's a type of empath out there called a dark empath. So the same way how an altruistic empath is probably the nicest person you'll ever meet, a dark empath is one of the most dangerous people you can ever come across in your lifetime. They're worse than anything else you can imagine, and they exist. It says here, a dark empath is someone who uses cognitive empathy at the expense of others, often for personal gain. They can recognize someone's situation without sympathizing with them. See that word sympathy? The key word I told you from the very fucking beginning that differentiates the two? They can have every quality of an empath without the sympathy. And that's what makes them so fucking dangerous. Because they won't feel pity. They're not going to feel, guilt. They're not going to have any compassion. And they can just do whatever the fuck they want. All those other things that you saw in those charts do not apply to these people if they so choose. It says cognitive empathy is one of 3 types of empathy, outlined by researchers Paul Ekman and Daniel Goleman. Now, cognitive empathy, this is when I was talking about what kind of empathy? What are you talking about? There's different forms of empathy. It's a very intricate thing. Here they are talking about cognitive empathy. So let's look at the definition here. Oh, it also says, in other words, you identify what they're going through, even if you don't feel sympathy for them or the desire to support them. Dark empathy isn't a formal mental health symptom or diagnosis. And it's probably because it's a relatively new thing, like new concept. It says the 3 types of empathy. Cognitive empathy, the ability to understand someone's perspective and thoughts without emotional involvement. Emotional empathy, being able to feel the emotions someone else is feeling as though you were going through their experience too. This goes back to the mimicry, how that was a symptom of empathy. That's a method of learning, but you don't have to do that to be an empath. That's because that's a separate form of empathy. It says compassionate empathy, a combination of cognitive and emotional empathy where you understand another perspective and your emotions respond as though you were in that situation. And this is the type of empathy that looks like absorbing someone else's emotion. This is the complete process of the other 2 forms of empathy together. So you'll understand it first, then you'll mimic it, and the other person feels calmer because since you understand, you're able to help them. And since you're mimicking it to learn it yourself, now you're feeling their feelings, you look like you're absorbing it. That is called compassionate empathy. How do dark empaths think and feel? It says a lack of pleasure from social rewards despite feeling the need for attention. So typical things that make other people feel better aren't going to work on a dark empath, like that gratitude that we were talking about earlier. They might want your attention, but that doesn't mean that they want to help you. They might want to affect your emotions. It doesn't mean that they want to do it in a positive way. And if they get that attention, they get that reaction that they want, that can be pleasure for them. It says high attunement to others, experiences, and circumstances. So again, that goes back to the whole understanding. That can also affect them still, wanting to understand things. It says emotional distance or detachment. We were talking about introverts before. This can also affect dark empaths, wanting to separate themselves from people to, so that they're not as overwhelmed, even if it's internally, like in their head. It's hard for people to grasp this concept, but the lack of this emotional connection is a form of feeling. It says, how do dark empaths act? It says vindictive behaviors such as gossiping, bullying, or intimidating. Use of emotional manipulating tactics or taking advantage of others. They're able to do this more effectively than other forms of abusers because they understand the intricacies of the patterns of behavior. They'll know exactly what to say to affect you, exactly what to say to do things to you that you won't even see coming for months at a time. So they're dangerous. But they're also empaths. It says, again, gossiping, bullying, intimidating. It says use of emotional manipulation tactics, take advantage of others. Okay. So it says physical aggression towards others. It's not that they're just physically aggressive, but if they understand that if they behave in this physically aggressive way to get what they want, then they're going to do it. And it goes back to the understanding. But this can be misunderstood as just some sort of brute force person or they're not thinking it through. No, even if they're embarrassing themselves with their actions, if they got you to do what they want, that was on purpose. A dark empath could be in a situation where they make you feel worse and worse and worse, even if they're doing it in the most embarrassing way. They could be yelling, screaming at you. But if they are saying things that's affecting you, they get the result that they want. If you're too intimidated to speak back, they get the result that they want. They don't care if they've embarrassed themselves because they got what they wanted. It says extroversion. Again, they're more so extroverted than introverted because these are people who want to affect others. They're learning just like how any other empath learns through understanding other people. They want to understand people for their own purposes. So of course they're going to be extroverted if a lot of what they want to do comes through the form of attention seeking. That naturally makes them an extrovert. Just like how sitting on information and developing it is more so of an introverted quality for other empaths. Wanting to hurt people and affect them and manipulate them, you have to kind of be extroverted to do that. A positive psychologist and cognitive behavioral therapist from Miami, Florida, her name's Callie Estes. I don't know, explains that most common behaviors in dark empathy are based on dishonesty. They may love bomb you, act amazing around your family, and appear the perfect partner to your family, but inside, they only want you for your money or value you can give them, she says. They're talking about how these people can manipulate you in a way where they can literally be your partner for years just to get what they want from you. And they can spend every day lying straight to your face, and convincingly so. Like with psychopaths and stuff, they kind of just mimic what they see. But with a dark empath, they understand more than just the surface level mimicry of it. They can really embody that false persona as someone who cares, to the point where it's really hard for you to recognize the micro expressions. It's really fucking dangerous. It says manipulation tactics used by dark empaths: gaslighting, love bombing, ghosting, playing the victim, sarcasm, intimidating, gossiping. Example of a dark empath's manipulating tactic according to Joy: that is a beautiful dress on you. I bet you'll be glad when you lose 50 pounds so it looks even better. But honestly, to me, that's very surface level, like manipulation. Dark empaths can do something much more subtle, where you could be talking to them about something and they could just say one word that indulges your insecurities. They don't even have to give you that whole sentence. Simply you talking about someone, saying something that made you feel bad, and them not disavowing it, but something a little bit more intricate, and it can get much worse than this, by the way, what I'm about to tell you. They could do something where you're talking to them about something someone else said, and they don't even have to tell you how they feel about it. The lack of response can give you all the insecurity that they need from you. If someone were to say to you, yeah, this person said this to me, I didn't know how to feel about that, and what they were saying was something about your outfit or how you look or your weight. All a dark empath has to say to you, or like a master manipulator, to make you feel even more insecure and believe it without you thinking that they're trying to do it, is simply pretending to relate to you. They could say something like, it really sucks to hear what people think of you. And in a situation where what you were being criticized for wasn't true, they just reaffirmed that insecurity without even telling you they did. And that's not even as bad as it can get. I'd have to think of even more subtle examples, but they can be so subtle with it. And then they walk away knowing that you feel worse, and they know that they could say something to make you feel better. They know that you don't actually have to lose 50 pounds or whatever comment the person said, but they said it anyway to make you feel insecure. The difference is, if it was true, then what they're saying isn't as manipulative. But if it's not true, how will you know now? Because your own friend just fucking confirmed it in their own way. So that's the type of stuff that they can do. It says dark empaths and the dark triad. This is the most important part. This is what debunks people's false notion of empathy. It says, according to Kane, dark empaths possess what she calls fractured empathy, a type of empathy missing critical aspects of what it means to be fully empathetic, like concern for others. Their so-called fractured empathy occurs alongside three traits known in psychology as the dark triad: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Now, for those of you who don't know, Machiavellianism is, as it says here, a personality trait that denotes cunningness, the ability to be manipulative, and a drive to use whatever means necessary to gain power. But the point is, the dark triad are the three components you need to be a dark empath, which is again like on the furthest spectrum of bad empaths or whatever you want to call it. But there are others that aren't that far because everything's on a spectrum. So if you can have an altruistic empath, most likely the equal but opposite is a dark empath, right? If you could be like a lesser empath that's more so on the side of altruism, then that means that you can also be an empath that's more so on the side of the dark triad, but you're not actually fully there. That means that it is possible that you could be a sociopath and an empath, because sociopathy is a branch of narcissism. So moving back to this definition, it says narcissism is a trait that exists on a spectrum. See what I mean? Everything's on a spectrum. It can also be a mental health diagnosis. Narcissism often presents as an inflated sense of self, a need for attention and admiration, feelings of grandiosity. It says psychopathy. Psychopathy isn't a diagnosis recognized in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, which is the newest one. In clinical settings, traits of psychopathy are covered under a condition called antisocial personality disorder. It says the main characteristics associated with psychopathic traits include indifference towards someone else's needs or well-being, use of manipulation tactics, low impulse control, inability to feel remorse. Machiavellianism isn't a formal mental health condition. It's a combination of personality traits and cynicism, abusive behaviors, vindictive behaviors, use of emotional manipulation tactics. How different are dark empaths from empathetic people. Dark empaths usually experience cognitive empathy only, which allows them to maintain their distance emotionally. While cognitive empathy is one of the 3 types of empathy outlined in Ekman and Goleman, some experts believe dark empathy is not accurate terminology because empathy in general involves a concern for others' well-being. It does not. We already looked at the fucking definition, and people keep changing what they think these words mean every fucking day. It has to do with understanding, and that's why you can be a dark empath, because you can have this fundamental understanding and still not give a shit about the fucking people around you. I am of ilk that a dark empath is just a new term to call someone with dark emotional intelligence something palatable, says Joy. In reality, this term desensitizes us. Yeah, this person is super optimistic. They're not looking at the reality of the situation. You're supposed to look at the term dark empath and finally fucking realize that empaths are not special, amazing, like people who are these spiritual, like beautiful unicorns that you need to find. These are highly intelligent people when it comes to the discussion of human behavior. And some of them are fucking dangerous, even if they're not a dark empath. Some of them aren't. It depends, which means you can be an empath and swear. It means that you can be an empath and say offensive words. You can be an empath and never swear a day in your fucking life. And you can be an empath and purposefully just want to offend people for fun. You can be an empath and be all these things, because that's not what makes an empath. Understanding emotions is. And if you think that you have 10 empath friends, sorry to break it to you, you're not an empath. Because this is too rare for that to be the case. You'd be the rarest human being on earth. That's like if you were to find, if you had 10 conjoined twin friends. Says, what causes someone to be a dark empath? How the fuck would they know? They're not empaths. Says, the exact cause of dark empath traits is unknown. Thank God they got that right. It is unknown. Says, many theories exist on how personality develops, but most experts agree it's a complex mixture of worldly experiences, disposition, and innate biological function. Thank you. Someone said something. Jesus Christ, all these websites are overwhelming me. There are psychopaths who are not serial killers. There are psychopaths who function on an everyday, because psychopaths do have feelings, but they feel in their own way. They're not just prone to want to hurt people, right? That's a whole other discussion. But the point is, just like how you can have psychopaths who can want to help people, and they do help people, you can have dark empaths that aren't on the far spectrum of that as the most dangerous people. You can have people who experience empathy in a dark way, but it's less aggressive, I guess, the symptoms. So that means that you can have empaths that move throughout the spectrum. And that's why you shouldn't be just eager to go seek one out, because any of them can snap one day from being used by everybody as a fucking band-aid for the planet. And then some of them can snap and become something very dangerous. So just let them be. All right, it says, what's the difference between dark empath and narcissistic? Narcissism is one of 3 traits contributing to the dark empath personality. According to Kane, people living with narcissistic personality disorder also live with a sense of grandiosity, entitlement, and superiority, as do dark empaths. It says the difference, however, can be that someone living with narcissistic personality may not be as self-critical as dark empaths tend to be. It says a common symptom of narcissism is that people lack the ability to evaluate themselves or be insightful. And dark empaths are going to be better at that because they understand information and human behavior better. So just naturally, they should be more critical. It just means that they don't give a fuck. They'll understand how fucked up they are, but they're like, whatever. It says people with narcissistic personality disorder are also typically low in all types of empathy. In addition, Kane points out dark empaths express components of all 3 dark triad traits, not just narcissism. And that's what's so important, because narcissists and psychopaths are not the same thing. The difference between empaths and psychopathy. I'm going to skim this. Dark empaths possess traits of psychopathy, but psychopathy does not necessarily embody the traits of a dark empath. So let's recap. Dark empathy can be described as a form of emotional intelligence that allows you to identify the thoughts and feelings of others and then use them for personal gain. Now tell me why they were able to define this so accurately. Notice what they didn't say. Did they say dark empaths are capable of putting emotions into other people's auras and energies? They're able to just put whatever emotion they want into you through the spiritual connection. Dark empaths are able to take information and convert it into emotional manipulation. They didn't say any of that. Look at how technical this is. Because when it comes to optimism, you know what gets in the way? Your own fucking optimism. If you have the optimism of wishing that magic was real, you're gonna fucking put that into everything you believe. And since you want to believe you're an empath, you want to believe magic's real and you're magical. But with dark empaths, because you don't want to be one, all of a sudden you see it so clearly. All of a sudden it's a very technical definition, emotional intelligence, identify thoughts and feelings, not just magically put them somewhere and use for personal gain instead of just wanting to learn and understand things and having an addiction to that. It says when you display dark empathy traits, your focus is more on how a situation can benefit you and not how it will affect the other person. Empaths are not focused on how the situation will affect the other person. They're focused on solving the problem because that gives them a better understanding. Dark empaths are more so about creating problems because that will give them the reward that they want, while other empaths are more concerned with solving it so that they can learn more. If dark empaths can get what they want out of a situation, they just learned how to get more of what they want. If a regular empath learns how to fix a situation, they just learn more about other people. And that gives them satisfaction. It says, while dark empathy can be considered a form of cognitive empathy, some experts believe this terminology is misleading and that in general being an empathetic person means having a benevolent mindset. And they're fucking wrong. And they're going to keep being wrong because we already looked at the definition of empathy as sympathy, and that is not the fucking case. Dark empathy is not a mental health disorder, and it features traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. It's not a mental health disorder, it just has all the mental health disorders in it. Eventually in the DSM-10 or some shit, they'll be like, yeah, it's a mental health disorder. You know, and they understand it more. How the fuck can narcissism be a mental disorder, but dark empathy is not? What? So it is a disorder. Hell, fucking empathy is a fucking disorder. Again, the fucking definition of mental disorder is a wide range of conditions that affect mood, thinking, and behavior. So how is dark empathy not a mental disorder? Anyway, I don't care. It says, is it possible to lack empathy? What? Yes. Understanding what empathy matters, types of empathy. I'm not getting into all that. So pretty much everything is on a spectrum, so understanding what other types of empathy fall on that spectrum is something that the world has never done before. If the dark triad can be on the spectrum of empathy, then it's very possible that the separate attributes of it can also be as well. And so because these things count as empaths, that just completely debunks people's fucking notion of what empathy is. If dark empaths don't need spiritual, magical properties from ancient native cultures to fucking learn information, then neither do regular empaths. You got it wrong. Those cultures got it wrong, and that's okay. There's a ton of shit that cultures have gotten wrong since the dawn of time because they didn't know about all these other mental disorders until recently. Now let's go back to this one page real quick so I can be done explaining how stupid this page is. Because now you'll get why I was laughing. Like most things in life, sensitivity exists on a spectrum. And within that spectrum are other spectrums. Much there are infinite galaxies within the universe. Think of narcissists, sociopaths, and others as antisocial personality disorders, APD, as the scales is dark to black shades of gray. These are people who conscienceless behaviors and self-absorption blow the minds of even those with only average sensitivity. It can blow other people's minds with higher sensitivity too. Because keep in mind that being an empath doesn't mean you're born knowing everything. It just means you pick up on the information faster than others because you recognize a pattern that's underneath the surface that others don't. And everything you take in goes into that web of patterns in your subconscious. You're just adding information to it. You know that there's like, if you're to picture visually, all the people on a planet, there will be like a separate realm where all their pattern of behaviors connect to each other in some sort of way. And you're just filling in the blanks. That's basically it. I don't know how else to explain it. It says they are also the ones most likely to show up as booking photos on the evening news or on your social media news feed. Their glazed over eyes reflect no life, no conscience, no remorse, no capacity to feel for others. Jesus Christ. Whoever this person is terrible. Narcissists have feelings. Sociopaths, psychopaths they experience feelings in a different way from other people. And people do not get that. That's a huge misconception. So this person clearly doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about just from saying they're void of all remorse. They sound like that fucking therapist from the Shane Dawson documentary. It says they are at the farthest, darkest endpoint of the sensitivity spectrum. Stop confusing sensitivity for sympathy. That's not the same thing. Oh, Jesus, you don't know what words mean. It says the Hannibal Lecters of the world. Oh my God. You cannot say that psychopaths are all Hannibal Lecter. There's so many psychopaths out there. They take up a percentage of the population. So that means there's millions and millions and hundreds of millions psychopaths or psychopathic people out there to various degrees, and they function normally in society. Some of them have families, some of them have friends. I personally hate people, period, because psychopath or not, normal, regular, everyday people fucking suck. But these people think, oh, it's just the psychopaths out there that are just in your life doing these horrible... No, it's just people, dude. It's called dark impulses that they act on. You can have dark impulses as a psychopath. You can have dark impulses as an empath. You can have dark impulses as a dark empath, light, altruistic, whatever. You acting on it is what makes you the bad person. And just like how with empaths, it's easy to solve people's problems when you know what to do. It's just so easy. You're just like, okay, fine, I'll solve it. With someone who's like a dark empath or someone who's manipulative, if you know how to get the result that you want, it just makes it that more tempting to follow through with it. It says, oh man, this population is so far removed from sensitivity, empathy, capacity, and spectrum, blah, blah, blah. Is it best shades of gray? It says, and the capacity to love that their spectrum, at least for this discussion, is it best shades of gray? Now, even in this discussion, you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. It's not shades of gray. They can help people. I hate that people point to people like Hannibal Lecter. When you have people like Sherlock Holmes, like characters like Sherlock Holmes. Well, the whole point is that he solves crimes and stuff, but he's not a fucking empath. There's the famous quote, I'm a highly functioning sociopath, And yes, I know he's a fictional character, but there are people like that in real life. It says the vibrational frequency that accompanies sensitive... Oh my god, this magical bullshit. The vibrational frequency that accompanies sensitive qualities like empathy and moral ethical behavior, oh, that fucking word ethical, on the other hand, is at the opposite end of the spectrum. No, the fuck is not. A dark empath can understand that to get what they want, society needs to function. And that could be their reasoning for helping society to function. It depends on what they want. It depends on what their personal desires are as a human being. And maybe they'll do some things to get there that aren't the greatest, but so do most humans. Jesus Christ, that's not how it works. It says this is the colorful part of the spectrum. The journey through the rainbow, so to speak. Oh my god. It says where shades and densities of color define the subtle yet key differences between an empath and a highly sensitive person. Can I just say that these fucking people ruined the rainbow for me? That was my favorite color and you guys fucking ruined it. You make me hate it. I still like it because it's my favorite color, but you guys make me fucking hate it so much because of how you can use it. You just had to take it and ruin it. Jesus Christ, does anybody understand what I'm talking about? Holy fuck. You ruined colors for me. You ruined them all. Damn. You know how insulting it is to tell an entire population of people that they're just gray and void of empathy? How would you feel if someone said that about you just because you behave differently? You want to know who else seems void of empathy sometimes? Autistic people. Heavily autistic people can do things that seems like they don't care about other people's feelings. They just feel them differently because they have a disorder. And that's what the fuck you're talking about, by the way. I hate the descriptions that people give. And that's why I keep saying most people are sociopathic and narcissistic, because I want to make the point that narcissism is not this little small class of people where, oh, I'm not one, so I'm a good person because I'm not a narcissist. A lot of people are fucking narcissistic. A lot of people are sociopathic. It's really a lot more common than people think. But being like a full-on narcissist or a full-on sociopath, that's like the extreme. And even then, you don't even understand how that works because you don't even think that you can have some of those attributes yourself. They literally think it's an entirely other spectrum. It's not. It's a spectrum of human behavior, and that goes on it. It's not a spectrum of gray and darkness versus rainbow and light. It's all on the same spectrum, dude. And that's a behavior that you as a non-empath are fucking missing. It says this is the colorful part of the spectrum, the journey through the rainbow, so to speak, where shades of densities of color define the subtle yet key differences between an empath and a highly sensitive person. Well, since you got everything else wrong so far, you're gonna get this wrong. On this sensitive end of the spectrum, please stop calling it sensitive. Relationships, communities, and entire societies can be formed precisely because of the presence of empathy or functionality. Functionality doesn't need empathy and can easily create functional societies. That's the whole fucking point. It says it is also on this end of the spectrum that self-awareness presents itself. So self-awareness is only for emotional people? Understanding information is self-awareness. Do you want me to grab the definition for you? Conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. Character, that has to do with human understanding. Feelings, human understanding. Knowledge of feelings, knowledge of motives, human understanding. Knowledge of desires, human understanding. You can be a dark or light empath and have that. Self-awareness is another one where it takes one to know one. Now, whether or not you need to be an empath to be self-aware, my personal theory is that empaths have a head start in this stuff. Same thing with empaths. You can have all this information, all this self-awareness, but someone who's not an empath can learn all the stuff you've learned. They can read books on physiognomy. They can read books on kinesics. They can read books on deception, manipulation, psychology. And as long as they keep an open mind, but try to be as objective as possible while learning that information, they could surpass you in knowledge. And for some people, it might not take that much time. Some people, like I said in a recent video, spend 3 years learning how to draw and can draw real people like it's nothing, while you've been learning your whole fucking life and still can't, you know? So everybody's different, and they learn at different paces and grow at different paces. So head starts help, but it doesn't mean that you're going to win the race. So when we talk about self-awareness, I don't think you need to be an empath to be self-aware. I think that it gives you a head start in becoming self-aware, but I think that you can easily be self-aware without being one. It just means that you'll have to get the information through other means. It is also on the end of the spectrum that self-awareness presents itself in ongoing stirring questions like, why am I so sensitive? If you're so aware of your own sensitivity and how it affects your life, then you have probably passed the fulcrum of the average sensitivity. The only thing that they kind of get is, again, you can be above average. But it says if you're aware of your own sensitivity and how, that's not even, see, now this person is also confusing the fact that self-awareness is supposed to be the knowledge of yourself and the environment around you, which includes the planet and humans. So if you don't have an understanding of how the world works, how humans work around the world, you're not going to have self-awareness because you're never going to understand your environment because it keeps changing. That's why self-awareness is so fucking complex. Whole other conversation for another day. It says, while most societies hover around generally empathetic and loving behavior, what? We literally have world hunger. The planet's fucking dying. What are you talking about? Like, homelessness is on the rise. Unemployment. Like, people are getting more depressed than they've ever been. What are you talking about? Most society hovers around generally empathetic and loving behavior. HSP and empaths are yet on another level. And you keep saying both because you really don't know the difference between the two. That's why you're lumping them in. They're so similar in their fundamental sensitivity characteristics that the average person not only won't recognize the differences, you mean like you? She/he will speak of HSPs and empaths interchangeably, like you. We already talked before about how HSP are highly sensitive people. They are not super empathetic. You can be HSP and not be empathetic at all because it's about the 5 senses. Jesus Christ. Empathy, psyche, oversensitive, you know, those mind reader people. Mind reading is a fucking technical skill of recognizing behaviors and knowing what someone's going to do next, because you ain't as fucking unique as you think. You're acting off of patterns. You learned off of patterns. What the fuck makes you think you're not going to act off of patterns as you grew up? Want to know why some people are highly sensitive and most aren't? You can't tell me. Pay attention to how a person refers to sensitivity. The most sensitive you are, the more you push to the right of the sensitivity scale. Jesus Christ. The further you are, the more distinction. Again, they think that it's like a scale between... Like, they literally are associating manipulative people in the same lump as narcissists, as sociopaths, all that. They think they're all one and the same. They don't know the differences. And then they think that anyone who lacks empathy is on that side. And anyone who has empathy is on the other side, which is why they think that empaths are good, beautiful, like amazing unicorn leprechaun people. Because they're like, well, you're the most specialist nice rainbow out there. I can't read any more of this. I'm gonna link it. This whole thing is fucking weird, honestly. I can't take it anymore. So I'm going to move on with my life. I've done the best that I can to explain empathy, and again, it takes one to know one a lot of times, but I tried to fucking explain to the best of my abilities why all these people are wrong. You take what you want from it, even if you disagree. Hopefully you understand that these people are wrong, because if dark empathy exists, then empathy itself cannot be a magical spiritual thing. Thank you for watching. I'm fucking exhausted. I don't know when this video is going to go up. Please tell me your thoughts on this or any information that you've read about these things that you're curious about. Maybe I'll do more videos on it, but I need a break for now. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.